On a rainy July evening in 2024, in the quiet, unsuspecting town of Bushey, Hertfordshire, a man stepped out of a family home. His footsteps were slow, measured. Beneath a white sheet, he carried something few would expect on a peaceful residential street, a crossbow. The kind of weapon designed to hunt. But that night, it wasn't used on animals. Inside that house, 3 women had been hunted down. Shot. Stabbed. Murdered. This wasn't some random act of violence. It was personal. And it was planned. You're watching True Crimes now. And tonight, we're diving into one of the most chilling and unexpected crimes in recent UK history, the brutal triple murder in Bushey, and the man who became known as the Crossbow Killer. Kyle Clifford. Bushey is a quiet town. Upper middle class, leafy, safe. It's the sort of place where crime means a broken fence or a stolen bicycle. Not a massacre. That's why, when emergency services received a call on the evening of July 9th, the dispatcher likely never imagined what they were about to uncover. At exactly 6:58 p.m., a 999 call came in. The voice on the other end was 28-year-old Hannah Hunt. She sounded panicked. Her breathing was shallow. She told them someone had attacked her and her family. She said he'd used a crossbow. She said he'd tied them up. And she gave a name. Kyle Clifford. Then the line went silent. By the time police and paramedics arrived, it was already too late. The scene they walked into on Ashland Close was something they'd later describe as one of the most disturbing of their careers. Hannah was found with a crossbow bolt embedded in her chest. Nearby, her 25-year-old sister, Louise, had been shot as well. Their mother, 61-year-old Carol Hunt, had been stabbed multiple times. All 3 women were pronounced dead at the scene. The only people who survived that night were John Hunt, Carol's husband, and one of the couple's other daughters, Amy. Neither had been home at the time. John Hunt, known to many across the UK as a veteran BBC horse racing commentator, had been at work, covering a late race meet. He hadn't even known anything was wrong until he checked his phone later that evening. There was a message from Louise's number. It read, "What time are you home?" John replied, saying he'd be late. Then, just a few minutes later, he sent another text. "Everything okay, sweetness?" But by then, Louise was already dead. And the person reading the messages was her killer. As news of the killings spread, an eerie stillness settled over Bushey. 3 women, a mother and her daughters, executed in their own home, by someone they once trusted. It didn't take long for the story to explode across the country. Police confirmed what many already suspected. They were hunting Kyle Clifford, age 26, a former soldier with weapons training, and a violent streak buried beneath a quiet, brooding exterior. What made it even more chilling was how prepared he had been. He didn't burst into the home in a fit of rage. He came with tools. He brought restraints. He knew when John Hunt wouldn't be home. And he had chosen his moment with surgical precision. Kyle wasn't lashing out. He was carrying out a plan. Investigators combed through CCTV, phone data, and witness accounts. The trail was faint, but it was there. A white Hyundai was spotted leaving the scene. A neighbor had glimpsed a man carrying something large, wrapped in a bedsheet. No one thought much of it, until later. The last known sighting of Kyle Clifford was in Enfield, North London. His hometown. He had vanished into the maze of a familiar landscape. And that made him even more dangerous. Uncovering the motive. Detectives soon confirmed what Hannah had tried to say in her final text. Kyle had once dated Louise. They'd broken up not long before the killings. And from what friends said, the breakup hadn't gone well. Kyle had been possessive. Controlling. The type who didn't take rejection easily. Louise had confided in close friends that he'd been showing up uninvited. That she was nervous. But there was no formal restraining order. No paper trail of threats. Just subtle red flags that, in hindsight, pointed towards something far more sinister. And then came the most unnerving discovery. One of the victims had been tied up. This wasn't a frenzied act of passion, it was slow, deliberate. He had time to make them suffer. Time to look them in the eyes. That night, police issued a public alert urging anyone who saw Kyle not to approach him. He was believed to still be armed and highly volatile. But as the hours dragged on, it became clear Kyle wasn't running out of panic. He was buying time. The manhunt tightens. Just after noon the next day, police received a tip. A resident had seen someone matching Kyle's description moving through the gardens of Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield. It was a quiet, overgrown place, easy to hide in. But not for long. Armed officers closed in, sweeping the area with dogs, drones, and infrared sensors. And then, there he was. Kyle Clifford was found slumped near a gravestone. Injured. Bloodied. Barely conscious. Beside him lay the very weapon he had used to destroy an entire family. A crossbow. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital under heavy guard. No shots were fired. He hadn't turned the weapon on police. He'd turned it on himself. It wasn't over. But it was close. Kyle survived his wounds. And now, for the first time, investigators, and the families of the victims, would get the chance to ask, why? But even with him in custody, some questions still loomed heavy in the air. Why didn't anyone see this coming? What pushed Kyle over the edge? And was there anything at all, that could have stopped him before it was too late? The horror of that July night had been captured in texts, in blood, in the final desperate acts of 3 women who fought to stay alive. But the full truth? That would only begin to unravel in the weeks to come. Kyle Clifford was no stranger to discipline. He had joined the British Army as a teenager, driven by a need for structure, or perhaps escape. But he didn't last long. Clifford left the military after just a short stint. The reasons weren't made public, but some close to him said he had trouble coping with the pressure. Others hinted at deeper struggles, mental health issues, volatility, emotional isolation. After his discharge, Clifford drifted. He picked up odd jobs. Security, delivery work, even time as a doorman. Nothing that lasted. People who knew him described him as quiet, strange, and a little intense. He wasn't the type to open up. But those who got close, especially women, would later reveal a more disturbing pattern. Controlling. Paranoid. Possessive. Louise Hunt had been dating him for a little over a year. In public, they looked like any other young couple. Smiling photos. Trips to the countryside. But privately, Louise had started to feel smothered. Clifford didn't like her going out alone. He questioned her every move. Her phone. Her clothes. Even the way she spoke to strangers. When she finally broke it off in late June, friends say she was relieved, but also scared. She'd told her sister Hannah that Kyle had taken the breakup badly. That he wouldn't stop messaging. That he'd shown up outside her house more than once. Watching. Waiting. She didn't want to escalate things. She thought he'd get bored. Move on. He didn't. Instead, something inside him snapped. In the days leading up to the murders, Clifford seemed to vanish. No contact with friends. No online activity. But behind the scenes, police now believe he was planning something methodical. Cold. Calculated. He'd purchased a crossbow months earlier. Legally. In the UK, crossbows aren't classified the same way as firearms. You don't need a license to buy one. No background checks. No mental health screening. Just cash and an address. It's a loophole many experts had warned about for years. Clifford knew how to use it. He'd trained with similar weapons in the army. And now, he'd turned that training inward, toward the people he once claimed to love. On July 9th, he approached the Hunt home shortly before 7 p.m. Detectives later pieced together his steps using CCTV footage, digital forensics, and eyewitness accounts. He didn't break in. He knocked. One of the sisters opened the door, maybe thinking he just wanted to talk. Instead, he forced his way inside, crossbow in hand, and tied them up. He moved quickly. Ruthlessly. Carol Hunt was in the kitchen when she was attacked. Clifford stabbed her repeatedly before turning on the two daughters. He used the crossbow to shoot both Hannah and Louise in the chest at close range. Some reports say they were still tied up when he fired. Others suggest they fought back. But neither survived. The level of violence shocked even seasoned officers. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment attack. It was systematic. Precise. He brought zip ties. A weapon. Gloves. He'd made a plan, and he'd carried it out in under 20 minutes. And then, he vanished. Forensic teams would later discover something else. He hadn't just come to kill. He stayed long enough to scroll through Louise's phone, reading her messages, possibly even responding to a few, posing as her. That chilling text to John Hunt, asking "What time are you home?" was likely sent by Clifford, buying himself time to escape. By the time John arrived later that night, his entire world had already been shattered. He was met not by his daughters, but by a wall of police tape. The news spread fast. Across social media. Across national headlines. BBC commentators' wife and daughters murdered. It was a story no one could believe. A family so visible, so admired, destroyed in one horrific evening. But behind the headlines was a question darker than any breaking update. Why? Why didn't anyone see this coming? The signs had been there, at least in fragments. The possessive behavior. The stalking. The breakup. The warning messages. But in a country where crossbows are considered niche or even sporting, few imagined they could be used this way. And now, a new wave of public anger was brewing. How could a man with a military background and a history of unstable behavior legally purchase a lethal weapon? How had the system missed this? And how many others like him were out there, quiet, angry, unnoticed, until they weren't? As Kyle Clifford lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, under armed guard, the investigation continued. Police searched his home in Enfield, collecting electronics, documents, and personal journals. They combed through his online activity. They interviewed former girlfriends, old army buddies, childhood friends. One theme kept emerging: isolation. Obsession. A deep resentment toward women he felt had rejected him. What they found painted a portrait of a man consumed, not just by jealousy, but by the belief that he was owed something. That he had a right to control. To punish. It was never just about the breakup. It was about power. And when that power was taken from him, he lashed out in the most violent way imaginable. The Hunt family murders shocked the nation, but the tragedy also sparked a fierce debate about weapon laws in the UK. Crossbows, often seen as harmless sporting equipment or even toys, suddenly came under harsh scrutiny. Experts and lawmakers questioned why such a deadly weapon could be bought so easily, with no checks on the buyer's mental health or background. Campaigners pushed for urgent reform, arguing that loopholes like this made violent crimes not only possible but more frequent. The police urged the government to rethink how they regulated weapons beyond guns, especially those that could be concealed and used silently. For John Hunt, the pain was unimaginable. The loss of his wife Carol and daughters Hannah and Louise left a void no words could fill. In interviews, John spoke carefully but with raw honesty about the trauma he faced. The world saw his grief, but they also saw his strength. He talked about the importance of speaking out, raising awareness, and pushing for change so that no other family would suffer the same fate. John Hunt also became an advocate for victims' rights, working closely with support groups and law enforcement. He wanted the public to understand the warning signs of abusive relationships, obsession, and stalking, signs that had been missed or ignored in his family's case. In the courtroom, Kyle Clifford faced multiple charges: murder, attempted murder, and possession of a weapon with intent. The trial was swift but gripping, with the prosecution laying out a chilling picture of premeditated violence. Witnesses, including friends and former partners, testified about Clifford's unstable behavior and threatening messages. Clifford's defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, citing mental health struggles. But the evidence of careful planning and calculated execution made the jury's decision clear. He was found guilty on all counts. Sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, Clifford would never leave prison. The judge described the killings as cold and merciless, a deliberate act of hate and control. In the years since, the case has become a somber reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in ordinary lives. It highlights how obsession, jealousy, and access to lethal weapons can combine into a perfect storm of violence. The Hunt family tragedy pushed the UK government to tighten crossbow laws, introducing stricter age limits and making it illegal to sell crossbows to anyone under 18. Police gain more powers to act on stalking complaints before they escalate. Still, experts warn that laws alone aren't enough. They point to the need for better mental health services, more awareness of abusive behaviors, and a culture that supports victims early on. For John Hunt, the journey toward healing continues, but so does his mission to prevent other families from facing the same nightmare. His story, and the lives of Carol, Hannah, and Louise, remain etched in the public memory, a haunting testament to love lost and the urgent need for change.